Hey LTC, glad that you guys were able to come join us for the last online LTC class for this year for this class. So give yourselves a round of applause. You made it through this class. We are going to start with our leadership retreat with Sunday afternoon, this next Sunday. So less than a week from right now, we'll be getting together at 2 p.m. this next Sunday to get together in Fort Collins. Sunday afternoon and evening, we're going to be doing the kind of wrapping up the last bits of our class here, and that'll bleed right into our leadership retreat, which will happen Monday morning starting at 9 a.m. Now, we've gotten all of the approvals from the county to do a meeting that's larger than 10 and all of these different things, but definitely still, of course, all the rules apply for COVID. Bring a mask with you if you would, and we'll have some things in place to just kind of help us with some social distancing and those concerns like that. But excited to be with you guys in person, to get to see you and just dream and talk and vision together what this year is going to look like. As I've mentioned before, and I'll continue to say, you guys are walking in as small group leaders in maybe the most strategic moment in my ministry career, and just the dynamics of a culture right now that is desperately needing connection, needing community, the lack of ability to do that in a big sense. I was just on a call with the university yesterday. We were talking through how they're not able to do much because they're so used to doing these big picture things. And they're trying to go super, super small with everything. And so just realizing man, you guys are meeting a need, that relational, one-on-one type life together, life on life ministry approach is really all that there is out there. And yet so few understand how to do that well. And that's what we're trying to walk with you guys into doing as we walk into this school year. And so just really exciting, not just talking like the start of school, but throughout this season of our world. You guys are starting your ministry career in at least Chi Alpha at a very strategic and key moment. And so just be praying, be dreaming, be asking the Lord for vision for your life this year, because it is exciting to me what we're walking into. We're starting this first class talking about the idea of the Chi Alpha structure. And we're talking about that. We've already talked about kind of the expectations of leadership, like what we are asking you guys to do as small group leaders. Now, I realize that that's somewhat changing. I mean, some of the fundamental concepts are going to be shifting a little bit. Resource weekend hangouts will look very different, with COVID and all those kind of things. But the essence is still all there. So we've talked through that, Eric and I, in a previous class, walking through that. But I do want to talk through a little bit of some of our structure, where we were talking about kind of what we're asking you to do, and those are very linked, the expectations of a leader. We want to talk a little bit about just how to think through within those expectations, how we are trying to help resource you and serve you and empower you to reach your potential. Of course, our job, our goal in all of this is to empower you to be a disciple maker. That it doesn't matter if you're doing ministry in Russia, or if you're working with Chi Alpha here in the States doing campus ministry, or whether you're helping with church planting. I've had opportunity to sit down with a number of committee meetings over this last year, really interesting, on talking through how can Chi Alpha better connect with church planting efforts around our country. And really exciting stuff, honestly, just talking through, because everybody's realizing that what is needed doesn't matter the context, marketplace, world missions, U.S. university ministry, all of it is, at the end of the day, what is needed are disciple makers. And that is fundamentally what the church needs, and is beginning to realize more and more its necessity to figure this out. How do we empower lay people? How do we walk with our congregants to actually be effective at being ministers of the gospel to their world, to express the love of Christ to those around them. And so just a really exciting time as we're seeing many of our alumni doing that, kind of really leading the way in a lot of areas, trying to think through and work out how do we do this post-college. Because at the end of the day, we want you to be a disciple maker. And you can think through, when we talk about structure, it's sort of almost like a bad word in Chi Alpha sometimes, because we can oftentimes see it as in competition with this organic concept that we talk about, that it's organic is the goal. And that really is a key concept that we work from, that we want to be relationally based disciplers. We want to be, doing life on life with people, and through that ministering the gospel and the kingdom of God as we do and model and impart the kingdom through that lens. But recognizing also, I've been doing prayer walks on the campus throughout the summer. Oftentimes late at night after my kids have gone to sleep, I'll get out. Sometimes I walk, but sometimes I kind of am lazy, and I had a staff person get a longboard from a former student who went back home to his home country, and Dylan Austin gave me that longboard, which is a motorized one. Super cool. I think it goes up to somewhere around 30 miles an hour, which I don't do. I do have little kids. I do need to live for a little while longer, but I can go pretty fast on that. I'm riding around campus just having fun and praying and being with the Lord and just praying over our campus. And oftentimes I drive or ride by the greenhouse on the campus, and I think it's always like lit up on, at least on the outside, like pink at night for some reason, and so it's like really dark, and all of a sudden there's this like bright pink light shining out from the side of the path there on the east side of the campus. And so, if you think about a greenhouse is fighting to really help something organically grow. But there is all this structure, all these things to serve that agenda, to serve that purpose. And that is what the Outposts structure, or Chi Alpha structure here at CSU, is here to do. It's here to really help that greenhouse, right? You think through it, and everything is working to like help serve that plant, whether it's just the right amount of moisture or light or fertilizer in all the right proportions to try to help it reach its growth potential there. And in Chi Alpha, we're trying to help you as best as we can, serve you that way through certain structures that serve that goal. Now, someday that plant is going to get out of that greenhouse and hopefully has grown and strengthened enough to be able to handle other elements. And so when you graduate from us, our hope is not that we help you be a disciple maker on the university campus specifically, but to empower you to be a disciple maker for life long after you leave us. But as we think through like how we work, just remember as you're walking into leadership that we're here to serve you. Now, some of the big picture vision behind all of this is that we're dreaming of the day that we can see CSU transformed. And in this moment when community is so desperately needed but so difficult and so lacking to find, your guys's agenda, if I can use that word, to make disciples around your life, to pursue Jesus with people in life, in community, is so powerful at this moment. But we're there to kind of support you, to help you, to walk with you through all of that. And so I just want to kind of talk through that, because sometimes small group leaders don't always understand some of the whys behind what we do. But the big picture vision is, hey, we want to see our campus transformed. Another way of saying that is we want every student on our university relationally connected with someone who is fighting for that campus. And it's interesting, a couple of years ago, I kind of broke that down really fundamentally. Brent and I were doing surveys, we were getting feedback from different campus ministries and churches that were reaching out to the campus, and we were trying to get all this research and compile it and kind of figure out like where are we on the university, and estimated we're somewhere in the ballpark of maybe 5% of the campus is connected with Christian community. But when we thought through how do you reach the other 95%, we realized it's going to happen relationally. It needs to happen through people fighting for other people. In this next class, we're going to talk through one of my favorite topics, which is fighting for people. And what does that mean? What does that look like? And one of the key distinctives of how we relationally minister on our campus. But we asked the question through two different ways of asking it. One way we asked it is by saying, what would it take for every student on our campus to be relationally connected to someone else? The other question we asked is, how many people would it take to get to, they say in really some studies on marketing and stuff, that like around 15% of a community that is connected with something there's a kind of a tipping point in that community towards that thing. So, the first time, I know you guys kind of grew up with smartphones, but I remember when my first friend got an iPhone, and I thought it was crazy that he spent that much money. And the second friend, I'm like, let me see that. I want to play with it, right? And I think I've used that analogy before with you guys. But by the time a couple of them started having it, I got so connected with smartphones and playing with it. It's like, man, I want one, right? But I didn't at first. At first I thought they were silly. So in the same way, so many times our campus thinks Jesus is silly because they haven't had enough interaction with him or with the community of God that love him. And so interestingly enough, with both of those lenses, we kind of try to calculate what would that look like, and came to the exact same number. Not just like close or somewhere in that ballpark, but like the exact same number, which was like 583 small group leaders, taking what already is Christian community on the campus, what is already happening, saying not just Christians out there that are never sharing their faith or never willing to minister to their world or never really like letting their light shine inside the walls of a structured Christian service, but those who are actually have a heart and intentionality to love their world through sharing the love of Christ to their world. And we came up with that same number. So we need 583 more small group leaders to get to that place so that every atheist that is wrestling with their worldview could have somebody in their world that could see that moment and seize that moment, where the Holy Spirit could guide one of our leaders to say, hey, there's a Muslim who's really curious about Jesus and is ready to have that conversation and can leverage that moment to say, hey, let me talk to you and love you and express the love of Christ to you and pursue relationally those people. That organicness that comes to that. Well, that's a big number. And I don't care if it's just the Outpost or the Outpost plus all the other Christian ministries. We're all kind of growing in this moment, in this strategic moment in our culture. But I think that it's interesting. We could think through what's a practical way we could see that happen. Well, and one way that could happen is we realized if we got every small group leader right now to replicate twice before they left us. That might mean that some years you don't really replicate disciple makers. Other years you might replicate a number of people that you've been pouring into, or just you have that harvest moment. But if on average every small group leader replicated themselves twice over before they graduated, it would take about 7 years of that happening, knowing that a small group leader's average career is around 2 years. So saying on average about one person going through LTC and becoming a small group leader every year, it'd take about 7 years of that happening, and we would get there through, if you remember Ileana's example of super evangelist versus faithful discipler. And so that's a little bit in the back of our mind. That is not the goal of small group leading, but it is a goal. It's part of our vision to say like, hey, we realize that no, we're not talking numbers and noses, just like, hey, we want to be this big bad thing, but realizing we want to see that campus transformed for the love of Christ. And to do that is people and is students. And if we're going to do it not through the big show, but we're going to do that, not that that doesn't have its place, but that relationally walking with people, that's what we're looking at. And so that's not that complicated. That's your college career plus maybe a graduate, addition to that, right? It's not that crazy. But how does the Outpost serve that? How do we in Chi Alpha really serve that goal? And so there's a few things that we just kind of want to walk through here in the next few minutes before we take a break to think through some ways that we serve that. There's a little bit of a resource out there that you can look at. You want to kind of refer back to some of the principles we talk about in LTC, or just bigger picture wise. There's a beta test. It's very skeleton wise, but if you go onto our website, xacsu.com, go to resources, go to small group leader resources. On there's an intro video with me on there. I'll kind of walk you through the resources we have on our website. If you find any other videos on those pages linked with that, ignore those. Those were just there kind of junk drawer folder type videos to just make sure that it was working with our coding and some of those kind of things. But we have a lot of resources on there that will continue to develop in the days to come, both with some of our core convictions, some of the key behaviors for small group leaders in finding, fighting for, and feeding people, resources for leading your weekly meeting or one-on-one discipleship, or just like, hey, what are some of the things that I should be doing right now in the phase of my small group leading. There's a bunch of surveys, which, maybe the survey gives you the results that help you think through that, or just going through the survey helps you think through the questions that you should be asking right now to help you just kind of coach you through that assessment. But there's a bunch of resources there. It's pretty rough. Let me know if you find errors on there, but there's a lot of good stuff that we're starting to really develop from there, if you want to use that. But moving into some of the practical here, you could think through some of what we're talking about here, the structures of the ministry, through kind of the snowflake example. If you think about a snowflake, it's that cheesy analogy, we're all snowflakes. Yes, you're all distinct and unique in God's eyes. Sometimes it may not be quite what your culture or your world has said in the way that you are unique, you're special because of all of those uniquenesses necessarily. In a biblical sense, we realize there's a lot to say that God loved us despite all the things that were unique about us. I mean, he made us unique, and yet we are often unique in our selfishness and our rebellion to him. But in a snowflake, you recognize that there is a lot of diversity, even though there's a lot of commonality within that snowflake. There's things like water and temperature that's below freezing, and the process it went through in the sky to get to that snowflake. So even though there's a lot of diversity in how the snowflake looks, all of them have a certain size. You've never seen a snowflake that's this big, right? Because it's not that big, but you never get one that's microscopic either, right? There's these different dynamics that are all common to a snowflake. And small group leading could be compared to that. Small group leading all has common dynamics, even though each small group community is going to have uniquenesses to that group. And so some of the things that are common are things like, hey, the small group leader is at the center of that, walking with people as you were trying to create community that's pursuing after Jesus in deeper ways, together, leaning on each other. Right, so that's a commonality. There's common things like having a weekly meeting, even though small group isn't a weekly meeting. Right, there's some of these aspects of all of that. There's certain dynamics like in our personal walk with God, understanding certain things like prayer or practicing the presence of God or sin and holiness or the lordship of Christ, the Bible in its place, salvation and what that means. Some of these kinds of things, you think about kingdom relationships or that brotherhood. There's things like doing life together. Although how life together looks is going to be very different depending on who they are and who you are. Authentic and vulnerable, but what that expresses itself may be different. Expressing love and laughter, but what you love to do and how you do life together in that way will look different. Sharing your mind in love with God as part of brotherhood, but how that, what are you thinking about? What is God doing in your life, and how is the Lord growing them? Are all going to be things that, while all need to be there, all are also unique. So, and if you want a breakdown of some of those things, you can look at the website, and it has more there. Within the ministry, we realize that there's a couple different structures in place to serve you guys. One of those structures is our larger community. Now, this is the one that sometimes people are like, well, how does that serve? Like, we're a relational ministry, small group, one-on-one kind of thing. And of course, this fall, large group will look different with just all of the university needs and regulations in our world right now. But the concept is still there that like what we do with large group, whether large group or house church or smaller things, we'll talk through that with you guys at Leadership Retreat. But the way that we go about large group has the purpose to help you as a small group leader. And so we don't see that independently, right? To talk about like the structures, right? There's structures that serve that organic relational purpose like the greenhouse. And there's structures that don't serve an organic process. Think like a fake flower manufacturing company, right? Using plastics and stuff. That program, that structure, those processes do not serve anything organic. They just emulate the organic. And so even our large group, we think through this, through how are we helping our small group leader serve their guys or gals. Now, how are we? How does that? And why is large group so important? Well, we realize that for a student to be truly impacted in the kingdom of God, the larger community identity is critical. That culture is created in community, but not just in community, but in what the community proclaims. Now that in part is when you guys get together, co-building, meaning like let your thought life out in front of your guys or gals, like let that in your community. But also from the proclamation, in a service serves that. And they have found in movements, there is almost always that component that is part of that relational tethering with each other, that larger community, because in part that larger community creates culture, both through the proclamation and through the modeling of the values of the community with each other. Culture is typically created by you guys, not by me. I can try to impart the ideas of what we want our community to be about, but how you guys express those values, say honor, how you express honor or your prayer life, like if you are expressing that or not, how you express those things really have the biggest impact on how the culture is created around you. Because if you aren't doing those things, then it's just a great thought from the preacher from the front. But if you are expressing those things, then to the people around you, there is this understanding, this is what it means to be part of Chi Alpha. This is what they really value as a community, which is what creates culture. But that doesn't happen by you alone in your modeling to your guys or gals in your small group community. That comes through not just you have a part to play, but it comes through what the community is expressing in front of them. And so we find that the community identity is deeply important. And we think through large group through those lenses. Oftentimes our staff will talk through that, like how is large group serving that? Are we serving our small group leaders? And how can we better serve our small group leaders? oftentimes one of the biggest successes to me in a large group service is when I hear a small group leader say, man, I had such great conversations with my guys or gals later that week after they were there at that service. Or we have an altar moment, and small group leaders are able to minister at the altar, certainly directed from the preacher and from the worship, helping create the facility of that environment to really respond, but in that context, the small group leader ministering to their guys or gals. And again, I love seeing walking out of a space and seeing small group leaders like praying with their guys or gals, or having conversations that I know are coming out of this moment that was created during that larger community service. So however that looks this fall, we realize that structure serves you in your discipleship process with your guys or gals, and is deeply important. The other thing, of course, is resource group, right? And the resource community is there to serve you. We realize that leadership in the Outpost or leadership in Chi Alpha at CSU is not synonymous with the Great Commission. This is not the only way that this could work. We think we have some things to offer. We think in some of these core convictions that we're talking about, like what we're going to talk about this next hour, that we are in the leading edge on this topic of like, how do we raise up disciple makers in our world? But there are certainly other incredible groups, other ways to do this. But at the end of the day, we realize that nobody is going to reach their true potential by themselves. That I remember being an athlete in high school, and I was a sprinter. I was on the track team. Very individualized sport, right? Sprinting. It's all on you. And yet, I remember in the off season, I would try to keep up my workout regimen and workout routines, and I never ran as fast in my workouts or as hard, even though I knew what I was supposed to be doing the exact same workouts as I would during the season. And even though maybe it was right after the season, I was still at peak physical condition from the year, but I would never go as fast or work as hard because I didn't have those guys around me helping, pushing me, challenging me, supporting me in what I was doing. Even in an individualistic sport like sprinting, you're never going to go as far without a team. And so realizing in a resource group, you have a group of guys or gals that are going to really be there to impart to you, to challenge and support you and resource you as you process with each other and as your leaders impart to you what you really need to be thinking through and how to help walk with you through all of these dynamics. You guys get to do so much stuff in ministry. If you're reaching out, whether it's with international ministry or just the different dynamics of the university campus with what people are wrestling through during this season, we find that, man, the only thing that I can compare it to is a international city missionary. Someplace that has lots of different cultures and ideas and worldviews coming together, and a missionary ministering in that world. That's probably the most similar thing to what you do as a small group leader on the campus, the level of dynamicness to the people you're ministering to. And that means, man, I tell pastors all the time, I've got 19-year-olds who are doing ministry that, professional clergy, missionary type, apostolic type, leading edge missionaries are trying to do, or church planters are working on and working with. And so it's really important for you guys just to have resources and have leadership, to have that spiritual authority in your life that you can really lean on and lean into, because it's a lot of fun, but it's going to be stretching at the same time. It's man, what do I do with this situation or this person or this dynamic? I haven't ever thought about this. And I remember when I became a small group leader, the Lord gave me a number of young men in my life that were wrestling with questions and things that I had never thought about. And I'm so grateful because those moments forced me to lean onto the Lord in a way that I'm so grateful for, and stretched me and grew me in my own faith as much as the Lord used me to stretch and grow their own. Now, we also have cohorts. Now, we're emphasizing cohorts more both with the COVID situation. Cohort is like a group of 3 to 6 on average small group leaders within a resource group. Then we have this idea of like Paul and Barnabas, that our cohorts are more oriented towards let's do this together. The resource group is imparting to you, learning from each other as you guys are thinking through how to do this. But the cohort is a cell within that resource group that is there to help you kind of do faith together. And so there's more, whether that's getting together to resource each other in imparting to each other, like in discipleship, peer mentoring, peer discipleship. At times there's going to be opportunities for you guys to go out together and just minister in those smaller contexts, to minister to people where the whole resource group or the leadership team could never like go do those kinds of pursuit, invite type opportunities in the same way. You guys are there to help, support, encourage, challenge each other in more of the practical going out and doing responsibility and faith, and as you express brotherhood or sisterhood a little bit more intimately in that context. And of course then there is the one-on-one with your leader, and that again is just there as a resource, that they're there for you to pursue them as much as you're able and willing, but they're there as a resource, so leverage them. The people that are resource leaders for you are incredible leaders that we have that have incredible experience in what you're trying to do. So don't try to impress them. The wrong mindset is to think I'm trying to impress my leader. Don't worry about impressing your leader. Worry about trying to leverage your leader. So be authentic, be vulnerable, ask good questions, be real about the challenges, the struggles, the shortcomings, and the wins. Let them experience the success and the failings that you're going through. Because if you're trying, there's no such thing as failing. It's only when you step back from striving with Christ on the campus that you fail at your call to be a disciple maker. But when you're trying and things just aren't going well, or you see incredible success, but now you don't even know what to do with them. I remember, when people came to the Lord and I'm like, what do I do with them now, right? Like, okay, let's walk with you. But just as we summarize this, just remember that we here in the Outpost, in Chi Alpha at CSU, that the leadership here is here to serve you. You are not here to serve us. We are here to be that, hopefully, that greenhouse that can help give you the support you need to organically minister to your world through these different ways of imparting, the kingdom of God through those relational metrics. And as we walk on this campus this year, let's pray, God, help us transform this campus together so that we can have a legacy on this campus long after we leave, and that we can see your kingdom come, your will be done at CSU as it is in heaven. All right, so we are about to start a class that's talking about one of my favorite topics, which is fighting for people. And this idea, when we say fighting for people, that sounds sort of like it's giving the wrong impression, like we're going to go out there and rumble pits with whoever we meet, or sockling for you girls, right? Like we're going to, what do we mean by fighting people? And when we talk through like small group leading, which is the idea of the community of people around my life that I am taking responsibility for, to walk with them as they pursue Christ with me. And that idea means that we have to do more than just find them and feed them. And I remember talking with a buddy of mine who's really my counterpart in Indiana. I mentioned this at one class at the beginning of the semester, but it's so long ago, if you bear with me. But I was talking with Derek Britt, and he came in to Chi Alpha kind of later in his career versus like where I just kind of grew up in my career in Chi Alpha. He was he was associate of a major church there in Indiana. And I talked with them a couple years ago, said, hey, I know what we talk about when we say Chi Alpha is different in a lot of ways than what the church world generally means by that. But what do you think of with that? I remember Dylan was talking with a pastor in Denver about our alumni connecting with his church, and he made the comment, I don't think this is personally specifically true, but it gives a case example of what I'm going to talk about here. But Dylan was telling him, like, we're really into small group leading. He's like, I haven't found small group leading to be particularly effective. And Dylan's like, well, let me kind of explain what we do. And by the end, the pastor said, oh, that's not small group leading, but I think that's incredible, right? So what is that difference? I was just talking with a pastor this last week, and he was saying the same thing. He's like, I have been hearing you guys talk about small group leading for years, and this guy is working on a committee, working with the Assemblies of God, who is our supporting body with Chi Alpha, and he's working on some of these task forces and groups with church planting, because the Assemblies is one of the largest church planting entities in the U.S. And he made this comment. He's like, I've heard you guys talk about small group leading for years. He said this last weekend, he was at a training here at CSU that we were doing with some of our staff, and he said, I suddenly realized small group leading is not what you guys are talking about, coming from the church world perspective. And so what is that thing that these pastors are like, when you guys say small group leading, you are not talking about the same thing as when I say small group leading? And what is that? So when I was talking with Derek, it's just like, dude, you have a unique perspective. You came from really a mega church model, and then joined Chi Alpha. Like, what was that difference that sometimes we hear and kind of intuit, but maybe don't always see it correctly from our different lenses? And he said that one of the biggest things, and maybe summarizing a number of different principles in there, but really summarizing, he said that in the church's mindset, typically, at least in his experience, the finding starts at the front door, right? That people come to the church service on Sunday morning, you find them there at the front door, you fight for them while they're in the service to desire to be part of this community, and you feed them if they come back. But it all starts and stops with that front or back door during the service. And in Chi Alpha, that we have really kind of shattered that way of thinking, that we are focusing on getting our laity, you guys, small group leaders as students, to get out of the walls and get out there to find people relationally, tethering to them, connecting to them, relationally ministering to them. And that particularly that fighting for them aspect is what's so dynamic, that we could actually serve those people that we are relationally tethered to, that we could minister to them, that we could sacrifice for them and express the love of Christ through that way of thinking. Not just in the church itself, although that has its place, and we'll get to that here in a little bit, but that we could actually get out of the church, that we could actually empower the people around us to go out there and find people to minister and fight for. That was what was so huge and so dynamic and what was so drastically different in his way of thinking. Certainly the feeding for can be very different. We give you guys a lot of resources, but we tend to kind of let you guys help really direct that snowflake, if you were paying attention from this last class, in your structure, and like whether you've got a bunch of lost people or a bunch of, a combination of different groups or people, and what's the situation with, you got a bunch of young people from a foreign country and they're Hindu, it might be different in how you talk and minister to them versus a group of, prodigal sons who are in a different place. And so those ideas, the prodigal son or daughter versus the person who's really just seeking Jesus. And so we give you guys a lot of room to kind of pivot and work within certain principles that we work from, and certain convictions that we have in our heart. You can see a breakdown of those convictions on the website. But again, in the feeding, that may be different because of its relational emphasis than what's common in the church, in that life on life type. But that all is outworking from that finding and fighting for, and particularly in that fighting for how we serve them and minister to them. And so that, again, whether you're working in a foreign country as a missionary, whether you're working in the U.S. with a church plant or as a church planter or a church community of any kind, or whether you're working on a university, I really believe that what the Christian world needs more than anything right now is lay people who understand how to fight, to have people that understand how to minister to their world and fight for the people in their world. And so that's what's so exciting to me, is that in Chi Alpha, on the university, we get to help you. That no time in your life is going to be easier to learn these principles than in this very unique context of university life, the university world. That if you can build these convictions, grow some experience, certainly help us impact the university, but through that, develop your discipleship potential that will continue to carry on for the rest of your life. And we see that in our alumni, that so many of them are just, I have this conviction in my heart to continue this. As long as they are, on this earth, they have this heart to say, God, I want to be used by you to transform my world around me. And that's what we're about. That's what we're trying to do in and through your life. And certainly you get a lot of other benefits that come from that. We get a lot of alumni that talk about just how much they have benefited in their career paths because of the principles of what they've learned in discipleship and being a discipler on the university with leadership. But beyond that, really our kingdom heart is to say, man, how can we transform our world? And CSU, we could have a global impact. We really believe that, and we've even seen that happening, that we are beginning to have this global impact through this principle, especially fighting for people. So what do we mean by that? Well, there's two different lenses. Again, we talked about that last week when we talked about finding some of those core ideas, whether principles of finding people or the practicals of how to strike up that conversation and get yourself starting that relationship. But then very quickly from that finding moment, very quickly we move into fighting for people. And so how do we do that? Well, there's, again, the two lenses, if you remember last week, are either intentional outreach or life of ministry. And in life of ministry, you've already found them, right? They're your coworker or they're your classmates. Maybe there's a little bit of finding, like, hey, you've got this, this year, maybe no more than 50 in your class, but there might be people in there that you don't know, or it could be more intentional to strike up a conversation with. A great principle to work from is there's certainly moments where we're going to be encouraging you guys to try to find more than just one person periodically. But if, as a rhythm to your life, if you could say, hey, I'm just going to try to find one person a week Whether it's just somebody in your class that you strike up a conversation with, don't put a lot of pressure on yourself to get them into your small group, but just make that the rhythm. Like, hey, I'm just going to be friendly that way. I'm going to, once a week, I'm going to find one person. Then your ability to fight for your world is going to be so much easier. If you find one person in your world every week to just make a connection to, and start that conversation, start that relationship. If it quickly leads to ministering to them or kingdom conversations, then praise God. But you rarely go there without having at least that finding moment. So find people, make connections, build a relationship with your coworker or that classmate, and start the dialogue so that you can be more effective at fighting for them as opportunities come, and you can feed them the kingdom of God. But it's just a principle, work from every week throughout the year, throughout the school year. One person, make a connection. But then how do we fight for them? Well, in that life of ministry, of course, we have them. So then we're intuitively beginning to look around and say, hey, where can I fight for someone? But we're going to talk more about some of the principles of fighting for people next week at the leadership retreat. But for tonight, I'm focusing primarily on fighting for people physically. And so we're talking through how do we pursue people in physical space and time. And so we're talking a little more specifically. This, while the principles, again, will translate into life of ministry, it's a little more focused on the idea of intentional outreach. And so I found somebody on the campus. I struck up the conversation with somebody after class that I don't know, or I found somebody that was just sitting by themselves in the plaza over lunch, and I just sat down, I struck up the conversation, I got the conversation going, and very quickly was able to really either filter or assess whether I should fight for them. And again, if you filter hey, they're not okay with you, Jesus, or your community, then try to minister to them in that moment and then move on. But if it's hey, there is potential here for me to keep moving this conversation and this relationship forward, as Jesus talks about in John 17, the goal there, then keep moving forward with fighting for people. And what does that look like? How do we physically fight for people? Well, we're going to talk through some ideas related to that here for the next little bit. One principle that I work from in fighting for people physically is pursue intensely, but come across casually. And we found this principle is really has a lot of application. It's just a foundational premise to work from. We sometimes have people who pursue intensely, but they don't come across casually. And that can sometimes be off-putting to somebody who you just met. Now, I think in our world right now, there's going to be a lot of people just desperate for somebody who's going to be willing to pursue them. But as a general rule, we want to not put too much pressure on them. Well, what do I mean? Well, I had a friend who was a small group leader who met a girl that she really felt man, there's potential here. But it wasn't something where this girl was just right off the gate, ready to just jump in to her small group or into her life. So she found out that this girl worked at Subway, and she worked on Subway every, I think, Tuesday. And so my friend would just eat Subway every Tuesday. And she would just be very friendly and just strike up the conversation and keep the friendship moving forward. I just love Subway. Man, oh man, see you again, right? She was just intentional. Hey, every Tuesday she was going to stop in at Subway and grab a sandwich or something. Why? Well, she was on campus. She was going to eat somewhere, so I'm going to eat at Subway there off the campus so that I can see this girl and keep the conversation moving forward. She was pursuing intensely, but she wasn't putting a lot of pressure on anything. She wasn't, just showing up hey, you want to come to a small group every time that she saw her. She was just keeping the relationship moving forward through physically pursuing that girl in a way that she could, but she was coming across casually. A funny example that I use sometimes that I think is just worth highlighting, I'll try to keep it short, but when I was first beginning to realize Lindsay I first met Lindsay I actually felt like the Lord told me she's the one. But I didn't see her for another year after that. So I didn't date anyone during that year because I had this strange feeling that this girl that I had met in Oregon was going to have a future with me. And I didn't know what to do with that. I'm not saying that is normative. I'm not saying, hey, take that as a template for your guys' way of dating. I could talk to you more about that. But I had this sense, well, I saw her a year later at my brother's wedding. And long story short, was really interested in continuing that conversation, but I was literally leaving the next morning at 6 a.m. to go back to Eastern Oregon, and I was not coming back to the Willamette Valley where she was in Portland and in that area, and I was heading back to Colorado, and we were getting ready to pioneer CSU and Chi Alpha here, and so I was like, what do I do? Well, I decided that, you know what, I'm gonna have to pursue this girl. I'm gonna have to really just make this happen if I'm gonna see where this could go. But at the same time, I didn't want to come across too intense, right? I didn't want to put too much pressure on this relationship. I wanted it to just organically develop without creating a bunch of pressure like, hey, you know, you should never do this. But like, you know, as an example, like I'm most not like, hey, first time I see you, the Lord told me we're gonna get married. Right? That's way too much pressure for a guy that she doesn't know, and really kind of creepy. And so I wasn't going to do it. I just wanted it to come naturally, but I needed to be intense about it at the same time if it was going to happen. And so I found an excuse. I hadn't seen one of my aunts very much during that trip, so I called up my aunt like, hey, can I see you this weekend? She said, yeah, I'd love to see you. I'm like, okay, I'm just able to come Saturday, but I would love to see you there. There was my excuse. Now, from there, I called up Lindsay, or got a hold of Lindsay and said, hey, I'm in town for one day here in a couple of days on Saturday. I've seen my aunt, which is true, but didn't tell her that I was seeing my aunt so I could see her. It's like, hey, would you like to go out Saturday night? She said, yeah. So went out with her, and everything was great. But then immediately left the date, didn't tell her this at the time, told her later, got brownie points later, but I was wanting to keep it casual, keep it relaxed in the relationship so it could develop. And so I didn't tell her that I was literally leaving the date to drive right back to Eastern Oregon, which is about 3.5 hours, slept for about 5 hours, maybe less than that, and then got up and drove for almost 24 hours to get down to southern Colorado to do a church service. So I guess that was Friday night. So then I had the 24 hours to get down for the Sunday morning service. Showed up to the hotel that the church had actually gotten me for that night before the service. Showered, changed, slept for about 30 minutes, and then did a whole church service. Then drove out of town and slept for like 4 hours in my car because I was just so wiped out. Right? So I was pursuing intensely, but I was just pursuing intensely so I could let things come out casually. You know, another practical way you can do that, I think we talked last week about the idea of lingering, right? Just let someone who's really good at pursuing people is good at lingering with someone, you know, after a structured activity, like, hey, let's just, hey, you want to go grab ice cream? Hey, you want to just like go watch a movie with some of us, you know, within, you know, appropriate levels here with this year, but like, can you just let things keep moving, right? Be okay when the time with somebody is wrapping up, but don't force things to wrap up beyond, you know, on your side. Don't let things wrap up too quickly unless you have to. Like linger, let the relationship keep moving forward. Pursue intensely, but come across casually. Let it develop and grow. Another principle is work from the idea of fight for someone at least 3 times a week, or 3 connections a week. Have 3 connections a week, and one of them should be pursuit. Now, what I mean by that is a good way of thinking about like what's the minimum principle here, or what's the minimum basis for a relationship with someone. And you know, you shouldn't just have this as a check mark, like, hey, I connected 3 times this week, I'm good with them. But if you're thinking like, okay, what's a baseline to work from? Think if you're gonna do life at some level with this person? And that's really a good lens to ask. It's like, would this person say, I'm doing life with them in this moment or in this season? So whether that's a first year student, like, hey, trying to create community around them, are you part of that? Or whether that's, a transfer or just a friend from high school that you connected with or somebody from your class, like, you're in fighting for them. You're trying to get to that place in your brotherhood where you are doing life with them at some fundamental level. And so as a baseline, 3 connections a week is really kind of a baseline to think through. And that could be like, hey, let's do a one-on-one thing this week. That might be like a weekend hangout, might be a large group in whatever context that is this year. But one of them should be pursuit. So in fighting for, there's really 2 areas that we're working from. And one is invite, and that's where we default. Come to my thing, come to my world, come to me. And there is a place for that. There's an important place for that. If we're going to create culture, to co-build with each other, we need to have that space to do that. But in the understanding of fighting for people, in general, the world is not interested in Christ until they've experienced him, right? The iPhone example. And that means that we need to build a relationship with them. And again, the focus here is we want to be their brother and their sister. We want to create a kingdom relationship, which means that Christ is at the front, but it also means we're tethering to each other. And so if we're going to pursue intensely, if we're going to create 3 connections a week, one should be pursuit. And when we say pursuit, I mean physically pursuing them in their world. There's a season where things start to shift later on, where your worlds so merge that principle ceases to be quite the same. But for a long time, especially at first, their world is their world, your world is yours, and you're trying to get into their world as well as inviting them into yours. And so if you think through your strategy is primarily focused on inviting, then you're going to be in trouble. And a lot of people just really aren't going to get to that place. You have to realize in intentional outreach, they have to be really ready at the beginning to engage your world for invitation to really work. You might invite them to keep the conversation moving because it sometimes feels more natural than, hey, can I stop in at your dorm this week? But then, the year that I had the most effectiveness in my small group leading experience, just had a very fruitful year, a lot of harvest happening, and there was a lot of stuff going on with that. But one of the key things was I learned for the first time this principle. I used to, do a very minimal amount of pursuing people, and it was always just so that I could kind of show up and invite them. That was really the goal of pursuit, was just to get in there, invite them, and move on to the next person, instead of pursuing them in their world. And the more I learned that, all of a sudden I learned that, and I would just, again, pursue intensely, come across casually. I would just walk around the dorms, once a week, and I would just call up the guys that I was pursuing, and hey, walking by your dorm, just curious if you're around. No, I'm over at the library. Oh, cool, dude. How's that going? No big deal. But if they were there, it's yeah, could I stop by and just say, hey, since I'm here. And yeah, okay, yeah, come on up. And we build the relationship, keep moving that relationship forward. Maybe they didn't come to my weekly meeting. Maybe they weren't interested in the community very much yet. But I kept the relationship moving forward, and eventually they would get to those other things that I can invite them to. So pursue intentionally, come across casually. Make 3 connections a week with a contact, and one of them should be pursuit at least. Now, in pursuit, this is where a lot of times small group leaders make a mistake. They will pursue until they can invite, and as soon as somebody responds to an invitation, they stop pursuing. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is a common thing that can happen is the beginning of the year, you meet somebody, you get a lot of these contacts and connections, and you meet somebody, and maybe you stop by their dorm, just to use that example, and you stop by and say, hey, we're doing this thing tonight, would you like to come? we're gonna go throw frisbees at City Park. You want to come play ultimate frisbee or something? I don't know. And all of a sudden, they come, right? You invited them and they came. It's very common for a small group leader then to say, I've got them, and move on to pursuing other people. That's actually not how you should think through it at all, but rather what's important to realize is you have at finding, you are trying to filter, like, hey, this guy's good with me, Jesus, and my community, or they're not. If they're not, minister to them in the moment, move on. If they are, then yeah, maybe invite them, see if you get their number, try to pursue them sometime that week with that. But then you'll find those ones within that group that you've assessed, like, hey, they've got potential here to really be part of my life. But then you're going to filter that down even more. And you're going to have some people that, like, hey, I pursued them, and that should be a core strategy at the very beginning, is always pursue as part of that initial strategy. But then from those that you pursue, they either keep responding to your pursuit, like, hey, yeah, come hang out with me. Hey, yeah, I'm at the library. You want to like study together later? Right? They're going to respond to your pursuit, or they're going to respond to an invitation. You say, hey, let's go play frisbee this, tomorrow night. They're like, great, and they show up. For those ones who are responding to your fighting for them, you need to fight more for them, not less, but more. Because again, you're trying to do life with them. And this is not just pursue so that you can get to invite, but this is part of doing life with them, is getting into their world. A great thing to do, if you can, in pursuit, is the principle of let them teach you something. Let them teach you something. You're like, what are you into? You're into rock climbing? I'm scared of heights. But you know what? I'm going to pursue intensely, but I'm going to be casual about this. Yeah, it's okay. It's great. As you're like dangling from Duncan's Ridge there on foothills up at Horsetooth Reservoir, right? So let them teach you something. Do something with them. Let them have the authority over a part of your friendship in your life. And that's a great thing to do. But you should pursue more. And those who don't respond, right? They're kind of hard to pursue. They don't respond to invitation very well, if at all. Just keep inviting them, right? It could be just a text. Now, I will say, as a side note to this right here, I will say we in our world default to the least relational form of communication as the default, and we move towards the more relational form of communication if we have to. If you're going to be effective in discipleship and in fighting for people, you should shift that completely in your mind. If you can see them face to face and stop by and invite them to, let's say you're starting up your weekly meeting and you want to invite them to that, whether it's online or in person, all that stuff. Like, stop by one-on-one, invite them. But if you don't have the time or the space, or they're not available in that way, then call them and invite them. And if you have to, send out a text. But then you've got this group of guys or gals that like, hey, they're not really responding to my fighting for them. Well, leave them as a text and just invite, right? You fight more for those who respond to your fighting for, and you invite strictly those who just don't seem to be there. So an example of this is we had this guy when we were pioneering Chi Alpha in Krasnodar, Russia, about 5 years ago or so. There was this guy that I met in an English club that we had on the campus. And I invited him to hang out with us afterwards. We were going to KFC, which was just kind of this sort of special thing there in Krasnodar that was not far from the university. But it took us a long time to walk there, which was great. So we got to know people on the way and the way back, and we just walked. And walking was a big thing in Russia. So I was intentional to just keep talking with this guy that I met and striking up the conversation, keeping the relationship kind of moving forward. And afterwards, I asked for his number, but he gave me his number, but he didn't live there next to the campus. He didn't go to that university. I had no way to really pursue him beyond what I got that day. And so I just kept inviting him. But while he would respond to my invitations, like, hey, I can't come, he never came to anything. But he would respond, which was interesting. But I think for months, I just kind of relegated him to text once a week. And the idea was like, it's just a text, it's just an invitation. But that was where, in my mind, he had gotten kind of relegated to, because there was no more context to build a relationship past that. But I didn't let go of him. I just kind of texted him once a week to one thing or another. Well, I invited him to come to this volleyball game that we were playing on the campus with a bunch of people that one Friday afternoon, and he came. And funny enough, he came in dress clothes, which, if you know Russians, is not that uncommon. But I was like, we're playing volleyball. But he wasn't really interested in playing volleyball. He was just free and wanted to hang out. So I stopped playing volleyball and just hung out with him. And we just hung out that whole day. I invited him to small group meeting the next night, and he came with his girlfriend. His girlfriend, they didn't know, gender specific, anything like that, but Lindsay was doing her small group meeting the same time. So that girl got into a small group meeting there with Lindsay and actually gave her life to the Lord that night. And this guy became one of my best recruiters for our small group community. Even though he himself was not a Christian, he was fascinated by this idea of God. And don't discount, oftentimes we actually find it's the lost people that are curious about Jesus, or the very young Christian, who often can be your best recruiter for Christian community. So don't discount them just because they're not like a mature, Christian of some years. And so it all happened because I didn't let go of the invitation. But don't keep pursuing those who aren't interested in your pursuit. Right? You have a limited amount of time and energy to invest into relationship. So don't fight in the way of pursuing those who aren't interested. But if you feel like there's potential there, keep inviting, but pursue those who have responded to your pursuit and invitation. And eventually your life starts to merge together into this sense of togetherness and life togetherness. And then it's not even at that point necessarily pursuing or inviting, but it's just doing life together at that point. Another principle to work from, pursue and invite those you are fighting for. Then continue pursuing those who respond to your fighting for them, and invite those who don't, until you get to a place where your capacity to minister to the people around you is filled with pursuit. And so there's sometimes this question, what point do I just have, too many people? And, that could happen for some of you guys. Like, I got too many people. Well, one, always be a minister. You find Jesus focused on the 12 more and more, the closer he got to the cross. But he, at the same time, always ministered to people wherever they were. And if you find somebody like, man, I don't know if I can pursue them, I've got this opportunity, well, hand them off relationally to people, and your resource leader and the people around you can help you think through how to do that. We've had any number of situations where, for one reason or another, the community's rhythm in one small group was not working for the schedule, even of another person that was around them, or other things that were happening. But just be intentional to always be a minister. But within that, really pursue, fight for people until that point comes where all those that you have found and are beginning to fight for are filling your life, right? And you're fighting for them, and maybe somebody transfers in the fall away from CSU, and now you've got a little more capacity to fight for someone else. But don't neglect those who you need to pursue and invite for those who you don't yet have, just because some of them have responded at some level. And so there's sort of an equilibrium that happens as you keep finding people and immediately fighting for them if they're okay with you, Jesus, in your community, is you continue to fight for them by pursuing, 3 connections a week, one of them being pursuit, the others can be an invitation if they respond there. But through that, you continue to pursue more those who respond. And as you get to that level where it's like, I'm pursuing too many people and I don't have any more capacity to find more, You continue to be a minister to your world, but then you are pursuing this group until your goal now is for them to really become no more pursuing, but really life together, life on life as a community, as you guys are doing life together from there. So there's a couple key principles in fighting for people, physically fighting for them, that pursue intensely, come across casually, pursue, connect 3 times a week, let one of them be pursued, pursue more those who respond to your pursuit and invitations, and do that until you get to a level where your equilibrium is just met. Like, hey, I've got a max amount of what I can do as far as intentional type ministry here. Now I'm just going to continue to be a minister to my world and look for opportunities every week to meet somebody new and to minister where I can, to pray for people as I find opportunities through that life. But then I'm pursuing those, my 12, so to speak, in Jesus' model as he ministered to his world always. And that is one of the core principles, or one of the core concepts that we're working from. We'll talk more next week about other principles of pursuing them, and spiritually and emotionally and some of those ideas. But for tonight, that's where we're going to leave it. Can't wait to see you guys in a week. Can't wait to just walk on campus this semester and see how we're going to see the kingdom of God advanced here at CSU. But we love you guys. We're proud of you. Remember, we're here to serve you. And so whatever we can do to serve you, to walk with you, to minister to you, we are here for you. Because at the core of our ministry is making disciple makers. And at the core of how we make disciple makers is small group leading. And we have the vision through all of this that we would see our university transformed. And we believe if we see CSU transformed, we'll see the marketplace and the world impacted for the kingdom of God. Have a great night, guys. We'll see you next week.